Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to this conversation with three thought leaders and leaders in practice in the area of digital transformation in education. Our goal today is to discuss the recently published book, Artificial Intelligence and Education, a Systems Perspective, focusing on the Global South, author by Zainab Azim, Calista Thoni, and Maria Rene Palomo, as well as myself. And today, I'm very pleased to welcome to this conversation Doctors Cristobal Cobo, Asia Kazmi, and Stefan Vincent Langren, who are going to share reflections based on their deep knowledge and long time engaging with these issues about some of the key themes in this book. Cristobal Cobo is currently a senior education specialist at the World Bank, where he's focusing on inclusive and effective use of emerging technology in education, which has been his work over the last 2 decades. He has worked during those 2 decades at the intersection of learning innovation, human-centered technology, and education policy, advising 24 countries around the world, and both in the Global South and in developed countries. Dr. Asia Kazmi is the Chief Executive Officer of the World Innovation Summit for Education. And over 3 decades, she has worked across government, philanthropy, and international development, distinguishing her record with improving learning outcomes for underserved communities. Before joining the Qatar Foundation, which happened recently, she was the Global Education Policy Lead at the Gates Foundation, where she created the Global Tech and AI portfolio that impacted 2.5 million children. Dr. Kazmi began her career as a mathematics teacher before moving into public leadership roles in the public and private sector. Dr. Stefan Vincent Langren is the deputy head of the Center for Educational Research and Innovation. And he is also a senior analyst at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, where he leads the organization's work on digitalization in education. He led that work at the OECD during the COVID-19 crisis, as well as large international practice engaged innovation projects in 24 countries. So welcome. Thank you very much. So we're going to place on the chat a link to the book, so that you can all download it, those of you who are viewing these. But let me begin with the first question. And the way this seminar is going to go is each of my co-authors is going to highlight some of the key ideas in this book, and then raise some questions for our participants, and then we're going to turn to them. So let me turn it over now to Maria Rene Palomo to summarize some of the key ideas in this book with respect to curriculum.
Thank you, Fernando. So our chapter 4 is on AI and curriculum. We started by identifying what are the key challenges. In the Global South, we have an overcrowded curricula that leaves little room to add new content such as AI. Also, curriculum reforms often outpace classroom reality, especially where teachers lack training or resources. We also have imported curriculum models from high-income countries that frequently fail to reflect local languages, cultures, and labor market needs. There's also a problem of unequal school resources that make a uniform implementation of AI curriculum unrealistic. And finally, there's a weak alignment between curriculum, teacher preparation, and assessments that undermines reform efforts. But enough about these key challenges. We also have a hope, because AI can help us a lot with these challenges. First, we should enable integration of AI concepts across subjects rather than as a standalone course. So instead of having just an AI literacy course, we should have AI in math, in literacy, in history. AI can also support curriculum differentiation, helping students engage with content at appropriate levels. AI can also provide curriculum-aligned digital materials that can be adapted to local contexts. We have examples of AI being adapted to languages that are minorities. And we should also help curriculum agencies pilot, test, and refine content before scaling reforms. And finally, AI can make abstract concepts more concrete through data, simulations, and real-world examples. Now that I briefly presented the key challenges about curriculum and what AI could do, I have two questions for our panelists. The first one is, how can countries introduce AI-related skills into the curriculum without creating bigger gaps between well-resourced and under-resourced schools? And the second question is, how can education systems keep their curricula up to date as AI technologies continue to change? Now I hand it over to our panelists to answer these questions.
Yeah, let's begin with Cristobal Cobo.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. Congratulations to the author. This is fantastic. Doesn't matter the time of the year. These conversations are always very, very timely. So I think we can start with a thought-provoking question, whether the curriculum is the best technology that we need today to face this new change of paradigm. I mean, it might be or might not be that the curriculum is the best tool. But this might be a conversation for another debate. Let me try to address the question that I think is essential. I think the big challenge is to create a curriculum that is future-proof, not only AI-friendly. That means learn how to think and how to work and develop with AI and without AI. That means go beyond the discussions of prompting. I think prompting somehow is kidnapping some of the more substantive questions. So at the country level, we should start and assume that despite the massive amount of evidence that we have on the tech, this is an uncharted territory. So starting with piloting is really a good idea. To see and explore where and how this thing works is going to be essential. We know based on previous evidence that we have the voltage effect, meaning that we can have something in a very controlled setting that is working very well, but when we expand the quality of the implementation, that might not be very good. So I think today we have to, again, keep focusing on the key skills and not on specific apps. Test your skills in different contexts is going to be way more important than be aware of what is the most cutting edge LLM. So that means, to some extent, have a discussion of how we are going to design assignments, exams that are AI aware. That means when we allow and when we restrict the use of that, but more focus on the process than in the product. That means asking the students, how did you build that knowledge, and not only show me what is the final result, right? All this sounds very good, but it means and implies massive changes. So one recommendation at the government level is start with your task force, your AI task force that will watch what is happening in different countries, learn what seems to be a good idea to replicate, analyze what are the skills demanded in the labor market. I think that is something that we have to put a lot of attention, and then translate that complexity, that uncertainty into simple, regular, clear messages for your education community. I think that's going to be very helpful. And let me finish by saying that the more AI specific the curriculum is, the more likely is that it will get obsolete, because the nature of this subject is changing all the time. So let's move away from gadgets and let's discuss more about the principles. Let's focus away from having the right question and let's learn to build sense of the complexity we have today. And finally, more skills and less prompting. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Cristobal. I love the idea of developing a strategy, beginning with a task force. It totally aligned with our intent in writing this book, which invites a systems view, a coherent view. And I hope that the first thing that task force would do would be to actually read this book to help them understand the system. Asia, over to you, please.
I agree with so much of what Cristobal has said. I think what we need to think about is what should be the curriculum in an age when there's a tsunami of content coming. You can learn almost anything. And so what national curriculums do is set out, traditionally is what it is that society wants its children, young people, and citizens to know, to be able to do, and importantly, how to be. And with this content and knowledge available, if we're assuming it's accurate and vetted, the focus becomes, what's the role of the teacher going to be, and how are we supporting students to have the skill of how to learn? That is crucial. And then I think there's this point about agility, that the curriculum was so set and literally printed. Now everything is changing so fast. Technology has always been around. That's not new. Machine learning's been around, but the speed of change and what it can do and how accurate it's getting is astonishing. And so the focus on skills is really important, but this focus on knowledge should not be lost. You can't do skills if you don't have the knowledge to use to work with the skills. And not which LLM. I think it's more about being able to be discerning, etc. The question about curriculum in countries, they were overambitious, they remain overambitious. And if we look at learning outcomes in Global South, it shows even more that overambitious curriculum is not delivering. So it's not a matter of dumbing down that curriculum, it's thinking about what are the tools that generative AI and agentic AI enables students to have the minimum knowledge to then be able to access the wider curriculum. So I think there needs to be a real sort of age-appropriate review of what it is that students need to master so that they can exploit the opportunities that AI affords. And I think, we have some evidence now of personalized adaptive learning showing significant improvement, but particularly for those that are furthest behind. Now, that's an exciting role for technology. And so if it can help to bridge the gap, and that means policymakers being comfortable with sometimes you have to go backwards before you go forwards. When I was, I inherited a class when I was teaching in England, they were well below where they should have been. We had to go backwards and do the basics, accelerate so that we can go forwards and succeed. And sometimes policymakers need convincing that's the right thing to do, that we're not dumbing down. And so really looking at how AI can support that personalizing of learning, accelerate learning, allow students to work at their own pace, but making sure that the pace remains fast, and allows them to go deeper in understanding concepts as well as go wider. But you don't want so much variation that there isn't a minimum bar that's being met. And I think there is also a concern we should have about over-personalizing, that actually when you're preparing students for the future, they're not going to go into a workforce that is going to bend to their needs and adapt to their needs. They're going to have to learn to adapt themselves, and also that they need to have productive struggle. They need to think hard about their learning. It's not all gamification and enjoyable. We want students to learn to apply themselves and work hard. And then the final point on the AI curriculum, anybody who says they're an expert in AI, I think there's very, very few people who are. So really being agile about what it is we want everybody, not just students, teachers, policymakers, parents, to know about AI, whether you like it or not. You have to know a minimum about how it works and be agile to changing. And then be a lot more experimental. And what that point that you made about constantly evaluating the impact, particularly on different groups of people, and adjusting things. Now, we are asking a lot of governments who have struggled with traditional technology. So with this new technology, we have to really think about what are the support models that need to be put in place to support governments to be able to meet this tsunami of change that's coming in content. But it's exciting times as well.
It's very exciting, Dr. Kazmi, and I think that those tensions that you highlight between ensuring that we use these technologies to ensure a common core, a common set of skills for everybody, while also leveraging the opportunity for personalization is exactly where a lot of the conversations are. When I think about curriculum, I'm struck by the fact, and one of the things that we did in this book, as you know, is to review existing use cases and then evaluations of some of those use cases, which are, of course, fewer than the use cases themselves. But we also notice the use cases that were absent. And to me, a big missing use case when we think about AI for personalization, there's a lot in terms of adjusting speed of presentation of curriculum to students, but not very much that allows students to actually pursue their own paths. I think we sometimes forget that the creation of the public school was a way to extend to everybody opportunities which people had had before the common school, which were highly personalized for many. So, for example, the education that Humboldt, the creator of the modern university, received, he was the son of a Prussian general. The education he received was education from highly skilled tutors. And those highly skilled tutors could basically teach students based on their own interest and make sure they were very well-rounded persons. But then we said, how do we extend that to everybody? And we came up with this idea of the curriculum. The curriculum was just a device to organize the distribution of knowledge in an efficient, i.e., in not a very expensive way to many people. But AI actually gives us the opportunity to ensure that people acquire a common set of skills, a common set of standards in different ways. I can learn about the American Revolution in 10 different ways. And AI would make that a lot more feasible than getting everybody to follow a particular path. And yet, we haven't seen very many use cases that illustrate that use. I think this is going to be a recurrent theme in this book, how a lot of the applications of AI that at least we were able to find are about tinkering with the existing system, introducing incremental improvements, as opposed to stepping back, as you are suggesting, and asking the more fundamental questions. Why do we have these mechanisms that have created problems? Is there a way to overcome them? Over to you, Stefan, on these questions that Nene raised.
Thank you, and congratulations indeed for the book. I'm always impressed to see how you manage to always remain on top of any big topics that are coming. So I kind of very much support what was said, and actually also what you said in the introduction in terms of the benefits. I think that one, and then I will make a distinction, but one of, for example, in India, one of the things that AI has brought is the ability to translate the curriculum in many, many more languages than what was possible before, and so when I visited colleagues at NCERT who are in charge of it, that's the first thing that came to their mind, so now we make it accessible to all these different languages, which wasn't actually easily done before. Another aspect is, and we have developed, this, one of the things that, as Asian and Christopher said, is, well, obviously, knowing a little bit about having some level of AI literacy has become kind of an imperative, in many countries, and that's what one of the things that everyone is thinking of and talking about. And I very much support what you said that, well, we can have it. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have it as a subject, but in fact, the real way to learn is usually learning by doing. And so people have to engage in different ways in indeed what are all the different aspects of teaching and learning of the curriculum. There are many opportunities to do that, even as part of current curricula. And I think that's really one of the big challenges for teachers right now, on how to implement the curriculum and use these tools and make their students use these tools, not as, for the sake of using them as a gadget, as Cristobal said, but really for learning actually the actual subject. One of the challenges, as you've mentioned, is that there are a lot of different contexts, different types of access to devices, connectivity, and possibilities to actually engage with these tools. And I think one of the things that I believe is quite important in the Global South. So first, we should keep in mind that in the Global South, there are sometimes connectivity and devices, and it's not, but, we have this very interesting that has been developed by colleagues in Brazil, AI in Education Unplugged, and so that's basically the idea of using limited connectivity, lack of devices, and not a lot of skills, but nonetheless actually provide access to these communities through intermittent connectivity, just a mobile phone. And we have interesting examples of how this can actually support the implementation of the curriculum and support teachers and learners when doing that. And I think with generative AI, one of the big promises for that is actually the use of a small language model. So these models that run on your own device without connectivity, and sometimes on just a phone. That's so the quality is not so good compared to the large language ones. They invent a lot of things, they hallucinate even more than usual, but you can actually engage, and hopefully things are going to improve, and so they bring something that I believe is kind of important, and that can actually work very much in the global south. No, I think in terms of the design of the curriculum, so one of the questions we have is, should we continue to learn what Gen AI can do better than we do? That's and here we should actually distinguish, and that was kind of done implicitly already, as I mentioned, the adaptive learning systems, but between generative AI and AI, which is not generative, but which still actually supports learning, because those are kind of two different types and have come with different types of challenges. But I think that I agree with all the panelists that we should continue to learn the foundational skills, acquire knowledge, and even the skill that Gen AI can do as well as we can, and in fact, it's a condition for learning and actually to interact properly with these tools, so that's really what makes it very important. But I think the AI revolution also gives us a new ways to think about the curriculum, and so I fully agree with Fernando as well, that we can actually personalize more, but also that we can learn new things, and so here, one of my favorite examples is, for those who like music, is, when you're a teacher and you have to teach music to a class in a public school, basically you're facing a group of students who cannot play an instrument, cannot read music. So what do you make them do? You make them sing. You try sometimes to make them learn the recorder, or you just make them listen to music, and you can talk about it, but they cannot really experience it. Now you have these, tools, which are these digital composer, which are made of traditional AI. Now they also have generative AI types, but I would say those are not really the best. And what can you learn? Actually, now you can compose a song, and you can understand music in a way that you could not understand before, because you can do it yourself without playing an instrument, without knowing much about harmony, just by tinkering. And so you can actually deepen your knowledge in ways that you couldn't do before. At the condition, of course, that you don't use a generative AI tool who just does everything for you. That's because indeed, you still need cognitive effort, the struggle, and to be in the zone of proximal development so that you can actually learn something and not just perform. So I think that's one of the new challenges, but I see, a mix of a lot of new opportunities, also with a few challenges.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Hopefully that task force that Cristobal was talking about, that basically thinks through a coherent strategy, will grapple with these issues. In the book, in not only in the chapter of curriculum, but in all the chapters, we say there are three things that we should be thinking about. One is how to develop AI literacy, how to use AI to improve the effectiveness of the curriculum on foundational skills on what it's trying to do, and how to use AI to help make the curriculum more relevant. And of course, those same topics are going to show up in the next conversation, which is professional development. As all of you know, curriculum doesn't teach itself, and a curriculum is only going to be as good in terms of reaching the classroom as the teachers embrace that curriculum and have the skills and the motivation to teach it. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Zainab Azim right now to share with us some of the key ideas of the book in this respect.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you all for sharing those thoughts. I think connecting them to teachers, we've been talking about productive struggle with students and their learning. we also need to have that with our own teachers, right? So when we think about the key challenges in the context of the Global South that we're starting with teachers, we know that we have a lot of shortages in many countries of qualified teachers. And so to fill those shortages, then you also reduce the qualification standards sometimes. And so many of them lack comprehensive pedagogical training or even deep content knowledge. We also have a context where these teachers are dealing with large class sizes and often learners at different learning levels, different ages, different grades, different languages, right? We just talked about, different dialects even within the same country, especially in one as big as India. And the current professional development that's often provided, and we've seen these in the existing evaluations, is usually episodic. So these one-off workshops, even in these cascade models, and disconnected from the realities of the classrooms in which they work in. And without that sustained practical support that is needed to change human behavior, even teacher behavior, there is that gap that exists. And specifically when it comes to AI literacy for teachers, a lot of the training efforts that we saw and that we talked about in the book are really focused on the tools and the technicalities of how do you prompt engineer rather than connecting it to learning and pedagogy and what are the implications for how you teach. And then finally, we have this fractured development cycle of the lack of good incentives to attract high quality talent, deficient initial preparation and pre-service training, and then this lack of support, which we just spoke about along the way, especially for novice teachers, which affects retention and development. And so the next slide, in terms of what we saw AI doing already, and most of the use cases were about administrative relief. So using AI to automate tasks like grading, basic planning, lesson planning, and in order to reduce workload. And we're seeing a lot of doing the same things that teachers may have been doing, just doing them faster versus doing things they couldn't have done before. And so, yes, it increases efficiency in automating those tasks, but we don't see a lot of studies or even use cases of, is this actually improving teaching quality? It is fine to have a lesson plan that looks great on paper, but are teachers able to implement it in the classroom? But there is some potential that we're seeing of coaching WhatsApp chatbots, which are really interesting to see, especially in local languages like Teacher.ai in Sierra Leone, where they can help coach teachers in developing their own plans or in their own practice in the classroom. I think we're looking for more evaluations of what are the outcomes in the classroom yet. But some ideas that we discussed about what AI could do are actually deepening teacher pedagogical competencies and their content knowledge. That could be through simulations or more practical practice if there isn't a human coach available, and making the invisible visible. Like, we know there are master teachers who it can be hard for novice teachers to understand, like, what are the moves that they're making that are actually producing value. And so if you can have, we know in the Global South, there's a lot of surveillance. There are places where classrooms are recorded. You can use that in a better way of showing these videos, getting AI to deconstruct what the teacher's doing well, and training novice teachers on that. So those are some of the ideas we talked about in the book. But the questions we have for our amazing panelists today are on the next slide, in terms of, our chapter highlights attention on, yes, AI can be a time saver for these overburdened teachers, but can it contribute to de-skilling and deprofessionalization? And we were wondering if you could speak to your own reflection on this tension of professional development that uses AI to build teacher capacity rather than replace it. And where is that line between a co-pilot and an autopilot that erodes teacher agency? So that's the first question, big question. The second one is, we see cases of AI being used for, again, grading, lesson planning, but grading is also a process by which teachers get to know their students and where they're at. So how can we use AI to reduce that administrative burden without outsourcing the critical human tasks that actually build relationships between teachers and students, which we know are core to improving student outcomes? It's not just about the technicalities, it is the relationship matter. So those are our two really big questions. Feel free to pick whichever one you'd like. And Fernando, maybe we work backwards, but I'll let you moderate this part.
Thank you so much, Zainab. So let's begin with you, Asia.
This is my favorite topic when we think about teaching and learning. I think we have a romanticism about teachers needing to create their own lesson plans, which I don't get. We wouldn't say to the doctor, you just work out how to do this yourself, ignore all the evidence of how it's been done till now, and we're going to be cool with that. So and I'm a teacher, I taught for 12 years, absolutely loved it. So I'm hopefully speaking not as a person who doesn't understand the challenges of teaching, but also understands the joys of teaching. So if somebody said to me, Asia, we have got the world's best teachers, they've designed these lesson plans, they have infused it with the best learning engineers, and this is going to be available to you at the touch of a button, I am going to say thank you. I was in a position where I was having to teach further maths A-level. I was 1 week ahead of my students. I had to do all of the exercises myself, nobody to help me, no idea what kind of mistakes they were made. So I think thinking of these tools that are available as a good starting point, and then supporting teachers to say, actually sit down and think about how is this relevant for your classroom and for your students? How do you need to adapt it? When you've taught that lesson, did it actually work? Who's benefiting? Who's not benefiting? I think this is a really helpful point, and we see both in the Global South and Global North that these kind of technology tools are really helping teachers save time. So then the question becomes, are we de-skilling teachers? No, if we are enabling them to have more time to think about how to teach their students even more. So the question shouldn't be about are we de-skilling them or skilling them, or even about are we improving the quality of teaching? We need to ask, are we improving the quality of learning? And we need to think about what is the role of teachers that perhaps needs to change. I worry about new inequities coming on, which are about motivation. So we assume that all our students are motivated, we're going to give them this content and they're going to be engaging. I taught in a school where it was very little motivation, and that motivation had to be built. And so how the teacher is thinking about getting the skills of students to understand how to learn, to know when they are down and when they're up, when to motivate them, when to glare at them, and when to sort of gently encourage them. These are all these skills that perhaps the human aspect of in teaching can actually be enabled because the content perhaps is now easier to access. Let us also not forget that there are teacher shortages across the world. When I was teaching, I used to think a class size of 30 was big, 32 was too big. I have been in Malawi and Tanzania and counted 97 and 100 plus. So if the tools allow you to break down that class size, to reduce, in theory, the pupil-teacher ratio, that is a very, very good thing. And we also need to really think about how teachers learn, and this ability to be aware of pedagogical instructional practices, to see it, to know it, to see it, to practice it, to rehearse it, to own it, and build a toolbox applies even more with AI in here. So we need to think about new pedagogies that need to evolve, that make hybrid learning much more accessible. And the same way where we are perhaps struggling to support teachers in the non-digital world, we're now adding technology. So we have to be really intentional about how we support teachers. And the second point about how assessment, I think that was the question, how assessment can be making sure that we're not de-skilling teachers and that teachers learn through this. I think the aspect of teachers being supported to teach more effectively, anything that reduces their burden, helps them to do that, is really good. But the assessment side is where absolutely you learn about what students know and don't know through assessment. And there's some actually very cool technologies that can help them. But I think what we mustn't do is give it all over to technology. We need to be intentional about actually part of doing this by hand and marking yourself is an important part of you learning the craft of teaching. And there is a science and there is an art and there's a craft to it. So you can see I can go on and on, but I'm going to pause there and then hopefully come back to the later questions.
Thank you, Asi. I love your passion for this topic. Cristobal, over to you.
Great. Well, little to add after this amazing overview given by Essia. I totally agree with the points that she underscored. So a few days ago, we reached the 3 years of the Gen AI, and we have gone a long, long way. These 3 years have been years of lots of learning. We moved from the oracle, the source of truth, to the machine of hallucination. Now we are understanding this concept of the work slope, which I think is very, very important for this discussion. For those who are not familiar, basically the work slope is basically saying that the time that you will be saving producing some contents with AI then will be had to be reinvested in terms of ensuring the quality of that, and might not be you can have an equal sum 0 at the end of the game. So look, I mean, what can be more appealing than offering teachers to save time? It's like, it can't get any better, right? But we have to learn that saving time is not free of cost. This concept that is coming in the literature now, the dividend of time that you earn when you use AI, I think we have to be fair in many cases to translate it in lowering the quality of the output, lowering the level of ownership, and standardizing the outputs. We sacrifice the human diversity for something that will come out of an LLM that might not be always representative of all the cultures that we're coming from. For instance, in this webinar, we have such a beautiful diversity. So in that sense, I think we have to be beyond the simplification of against or in favor of AI. We have to think carefully on this 3 level of knowledge production that we have today. What is the knowledge that is completely human-led and we don't want to delegate? What are the things that we can do and we can enhance with these machines? And what are the things that we completely can delegate without sacrificing the quality of the learning and the quality of the teaching, right? I think that for me is the big discussion now. We take the teaching profession, we take the activities that teachers are doing on a regular basis, and let's think, what are the things that are low thinking work that is good to outsource? And what are the things that are high thinking and highly contextualized that we want to keep at the core of the human control, right? So it's good to have AI drafts, it's good to have worksheets done by these machines or templates, but the goals need to be addressed by the teachers, right? And then reinforcement, the encouragement of a student that is getting disconnected, I think has to be done by a human. So obviously it's a non-brainer for you that are expert, but I think we have to bring the signal that we have to have this conversation. Let's break down the teaching profession. Let's break down the task and I think how we can help and where. Now, the second element is the teacher professional development that at this stage is going to be instrumental. I've always believed that it's much better to learn from peers than from an expert that might not understand your context. But even if we use AI and we ask AI to generate a lesson plan, it's really, really important that immediately after that, in teams with peers, we break down the outputs, we critique the weaknesses of that and the strengths of it. And then what are the missing points in terms of localizing this contextualization, this content? So then we will be in a much better position to know how and where to delegate, and we will be hearing from colleagues. And also happens to be a very good way of learning, right? When we listen to other colleagues, what is the thinking process that they're? So being explicit on what not to delegate, and this is a big concern I have today, because I'm terrified that if these machines evolve, we will be tempted to say, okay, low-income settings, they will have AI. It doesn't matter, we don't have teachers, right? So have a very thoughtful discussion on what not to delegate. It's going to be instrumental. For me, one clear example is the feedback. Feedback is really important, not only to learn your students, but and also in terms of ensuring the human connection with the students. Based on the evidence that we have seen so far, AI tutors can be very helpful, very instrumental to give some feedback, but that is not equivalent to a human feedback. We can complement, but not replace. And I think that is for me instrumental. So wrapping up on my observation here is the risk of over delegating because of the temptation of saving time can bring us new troubles, right? So we have to navigate in this very complex gray zone. That is not technical discussion, it's a cognitive experience-based discussion. And I believe in that sense, we will bring, and sorry to be romantic here, but some of the key aspects of teacher, right? How to build compassion, how to build empathy with the students, how to do not sacrifice the common sense or the sense of humor because of efficiency. And I think in that sense, we will be bringing AI, adding value without replacing human connection.
Thank you so much, Cristobal. Nothing wrong with being romantic. And I love the idea of deconstructing the teaching profession. I think that's another example of how AI can help us really transform the system rather than just add small improvements. Sometimes I find people who seem to have this image of a teacher as Atlas, holding the world in their hands, doing their work alone, without realizing that most professions nowadays are highly collaborative professions, and that AI platforms actually enable that in unprecedented ways. Take, for example, codings, people, software engineers. The best software engineers don't do their work alone. They're able to do great work because they actually know how to collaborate in what they do, how to get feedback in real time from peers. And teaching in most schools is not that kind of profession. It's still one of the few professions in which we expect a single individual to do things that are beyond the capacities of individuals. So that's a great example of how AI could help us transform the profession in very good ways, not replace the profession, actually help it move forward. Stefan, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's always difficult to come third, you know, that's so a lot of things have already been said and very brilliantly. I think, so I will try just to add so one thing that really I like very much, and I fully agree, you know, in your chapter, and, you know, it's very much this idea that the professional development of teachers on these topics is really not about prompt engineering or the use of the tool, but, you know, and I think that's always one of the problems I've had with when we talk about digital competencies or AI competencies, because it kind of put the emphasis on the technology when in fact it's the pedagogy and how to integrate it and how to support, you know, the teaching or the learning of the students that really matters. And you're absolutely right that, you know, professional development is a big challenge. You know, it's, and not just for that particular topic, you know, and partly because in most, so for example, on technology, in most countries now, or in many countries, you have standards that actually require pre-service education to integrate some element of, you know, technology, etc. But once you are in service, which is a majority of the profession, then in the few cases where you are requested to continue to, you know, take professional development and to update some of your knowledge, you know, it's optional what you do, and so that in fact, you know, if you're not interested, so one of the indirect ways many governments do is basically to integrate digital skills or AI skills or whatever for the students, and hoping that the teachers will have actually to develop theirs to support. But it doesn't always work that way, you know, and so that, I must say, it's a challenge, and I hope we had the solution for that, because of course it's also a question of funding and everything. So, but so I really fully agree. One of the things that you've mentioned, you know, in terms of what's going on in some countries in the global south, and perhaps where it's more, it's the you know, you've mentioned the surveillance aspect, cameras in classroom and etc. Well, actually, there is one creepy thing that I like with AI, and it's this classroom analytics. And so it's basically, you know, when instead of using these tools for surveillance, you know, you use them to provide feedback to the teacher who did the course on how long, what are the different types of pedagogical activities I've had with my class, to whom did I speak, where did I move in my class, you know, how much productive time there was, etc. And really just as a tool for you as a teacher to reflect on your practice, you know, and because in many cases, having another human being, we always say it's good to have observation and to get your peers to, you know, comment and have a discussion. But in practice, it's not easy to do. And so that's really where it can be possible. Of course, it comes with a huge risk, because you have to really trust your employer. You have, you know, the regulation. And so it is not easy to implement, but I think that it is really one of the interesting aspects of the use of AI continuously for professional development of the teachers. Now, when we speak about, you know, de-skilling and the learning and what we should do. And I think that, Cristobal and Asia had provided very well the two aspects of the thing, because one aspect is really also being realistic, and realistic about the conditions that people have, the teacher shortages, the quality of the teachers, the possibilities to support them so that they become great teachers. And while we know that the level in different countries is quite different, and in some cases, if you can actually improve the quality of the teaching thanks to a co-pilot or the technology, that's not bad, And so we have, as you know, this interesting study coming from Stanford showing how, using an educational Gen AI in a tutoring platform so that, and we know that tutoring is a very effective way to improve learning, then actually you can improve the performance of the less experienced tutors so that actually they provide more or less at the same level as the good ones. And it doesn't make much difference if you're already a good tutor, that's and well, when I apply that to some countries in the global south, where I know there are shortages, that the qualifications is not always great, so I can see that this can be very beneficial, that and even so, I don't like the idea in itself so much, I must say, because it gives this impression of, possible replacement, etc. But it also very much links with the other part of, the thing, which is basically how, and both Asa and Cristobal mentioned it, it's what does a teacher become, when some of these things actually happen. We still want them to learn and to become better teachers, and it is exactly the same challenge as for the students. If they offload everything to a machine, then they're not going to learn much. And so perhaps as an employer you're fine with that. And we even have some examples of scripted instruction that had beneficial results. In the global south, but that's really not how we think about education, because education is not just about learning outcomes. In fact, it's more than what we measure, and that's why we need, the socialization, the relations, and that's why we want, to continue to have teachers and not have replacement indeed, but just improvement. Now, let me say, because I often hear that, of course, the benefits of AI, and I say that myself, the benefits of AI to save time and diminish the administrative burden. Well, grading is not an administrative burden, actually. It is really part of the teaching and learning, and so when people call it administrative, I always feel like, oh, is it what they mean? No, it is burdensome, it is time consuming, but it's not an administrative burden. I would say probably I wouldn't be as radical. I don't know if Cristobal is that radical, but I think the big question is to know also not just what we delegate or not delegate, but it's also how often we do it and, to what extent. Because in fact, the Gen AI is great for feedback, So if as Asa, you have 100 pupils in your class and you want to give them detailed feedback using a rubric, well, if you can have an LLM educational one, preferably, but who can actually give you the first go at it, then that's great, that's if you have you do a quiz, and you just have an AI that summarize what the class has understood or who struggles, and perhaps saving time, However, if it's for, both for formative and summative, you need to continue to assess your students. If I go back to my musical metaphor of before, it's a bit otherwise, as if you never listen to the people have either written or are playing. So you're teaching them an instrument, but you ask a machine to listen to what they're doing, and so there is a big problem if something like that happens, and so I wouldn't say that teachers should not use these tools for feedback or for assessment, but that really they have to retain the final responsibility, and that is also actually one, and we may talk about it later. That's also one of the challenges of the design of these tools. When they are there to support teachers, how they actually incentivize and support teachers in being autonomous and having this agency and make it easy for them not to outsource everything, but it's also their own responsibility, like it's students' responsibility to understand that, if I give an assignment so that I learn something by doing it, and I just ask GenAI to do it for me, then I'm not going to learn anything. So I have to remain engaged in that. And as Asia mentioned, I think that one of the big challenges that AI brings is, this question of motivation and why do we learn? And is it just to get a grade and to move through, or is it actually because we want to learn something and we feel like we're doing something interesting enough to learn something? And yeah, I think that's really one of the big challenge. It's not just Gen AI; it's not going to solve it for us. It may give ideas. There are these also interesting tools which give different types of warm-up activities so that you make your curriculum more exciting, or so that in fact it gives a lot of ideas. Sometimes teachers are so busy that they're not fully sure what they want to do, and so if you can actually present in different ways for different groups, etc., this can be very helpful. And I think that's really how teachers have to learn to use these tools, and where professional development should also be about.
Thank you so much, Stefan. So Asia wanted to say something on this issue before we go to the next question. I can see that she's eager to say something. Go for it.
I just very briefly, I think this is probably one of the most exciting use cases of Gen AI, especially when you have connectivity issues of how it can support teachers to be more effective. And then the second point linked to that is when it can save you assessment time. The important thing is, what do you do with that? And so the assessment informed instruction is often where teachers perhaps are not as empowered at the moment on what to do with assessment information, and where the generative AI can guide them with personalized worksheets or ideas on what to do next. That is where the power of generative AI and large language models, I think, will be very effective if we support teachers right.
Thank you, Asia. And of course, the first thing we need to do to support teachers adequately is to listen to them and to co-construct with them solutions. One of the studies that we cite in the book is a study in which I participated with some colleagues in Brazil, in which we surveyed a number of teachers and we asked them, what are the biggest challenges that you face that you wish you had a superpower to address? And we basically took their top challenges and looked at how AI and smart classrooms could help solve them. And it could help solve all of them. But you then compare that with many of the existing current implementations of AI, and you see the disconnect. You see that there are people producing solutions for problems that teachers don't think they have. Well, for the real problems that they have, it seems that these are shapes passing by each other in the night. So we've been talking about curriculum, we've been talking about pedagogy, we've been talking about supporting teachers, but of course that's only the tip of the iceberg. What is above the surface, under the surface, is the organization, the processes, the governance of school systems, very often invisible, but not for that reason less important. And so let's now turn to the question of governance and how can AI help improve governance and accountability of education systems. And let me turn it over to my colleague Calista to share with us some of the key ideas in the book in this respect.
Thank you, Fernando, and great to hear the insights. I think I agree. If I could make a pitch for what's important, it's this part, underlying everything that we've been talking about and making all of this possible. So in our book, we cover a few challenges in governance, particularly in the Global South, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with. The first is the issue of accountability. There's a big challenge in our ability to link the inputs, the processes, how much we're spending, with the outcomes that we're seeing in education systems. And we're also seeing that oftentimes in Global South countries and contexts, there isn't quite a clear accountability structure and many gaps in terms of whose responsibility it is to oversee. This is often amplified in decentralized settings where there's a distance between a central authority kind of making decisions about where to spend, how much to spend, what to spend on, and implementing parts, which are schools that are very, very far away from these urban centers. We've also seen a lot about capacity, the uneven distribution of capacity, which refers to the competencies, the capabilities, as well as the resources to actually exercise governance effectively across all levels. there is that ministry, but there's also the teachers, the school leaders, the principals, the middle tier that has been that has come up frequently in discussions about accountability and governance. And so there is that uneven capacity in terms of who can actually govern effectively within education, who decides what is being taught, who decides how we evaluate and ensure quality. There's often limited issues there. We're also seeing some challenges with the use of data and information. As much as we would like to make data-driven decisions and to have a strong evidence base to guide the decisions and policies that are introduced in the Global South, oftentimes that data isn't quite available. I've seen this firsthand where everything is collected manually and then scanned and then put into an Excel file, and that's concentrated in that particular school, maybe that district leader, but that doesn't quite reach the ministry, or maybe it's the data is not quite accurate because there's someone who wants to present themselves in their school a certain way to a governing authority. So I think those are not new challenges, but they definitely create a certain contextual, they create a contextual consideration for how we could govern effectively in the Global South. And lastly, I think is the issue of resource management and allocation. The Global South is not new to allegations of funding misuse or suboptimal allocation strategies. And we don't really quite understand how the allocation of resources can lead to very effective improvements because we don't have that systems view oftentimes. And so I think there's a riddle and there's a unique combination of factors when working on education in the Global South that I think set up a good platform for how we can explore AI's possible contributions. And so in our review for this particular chapter of how AI and education governance, what existing AI and education governance initiatives are out there, we're seeing three main kind of themes. The first is to do with resource allocation, which was one of the challenges we mentioned earlier, where there are AI modeling tools as well as matching algorithms that review program data and assess whether or not there are certain trends to take note of, whether or not there's matches between skills that should then guide decisions about how much resources to allocate, whether that's human workforce and talent or financial resources. We're also seeing that AI is helping with strategic planning. And so this is the predictive capacity of what we need to do in the next 5 to 10 years, which I think is a frequent question that ministries ask themselves, right? What's the industry that's going to be developing soon? What is the talent need for that particular industry? What are the skills that are needed? Are there trends that we're seeing over time that then influence our strategic plans in the future? That's another group of deployments that we've seen both in Global South as well as learning examples that we're learning from the Global North. And then lastly, I think this is an expected use case, that of monitoring and evaluation. So I think AI is a powerful engine that can process a significant amount of data very quickly with a lot less analytical, I guess, access or capacity that's needed. It's not as complex anymore. Like you can use human language to make these analyses accessible to you. And so we're seeing use cases as well of reviewing and analyzing education performance data, as well as enabling analysis of feedback and sentiments about, for example, public participation in plans, and engagement with constituents. So there's some interesting things going on, and I think the anchor of this book has been kind of raising the tension between improvement and transformation. And so I think what we were seeing are still fall under the category of the improvement, but we also wanted to put forward a vision in this chapter of what AI could do related to transformation. So with that enhanced analytical capacity, can we change the way that we do policy responses so that we're not waiting for these very, very long cycles? I think earlier Dr. Arcia mentioned that the topic of agility, and I think just as much as that applies to curriculum, that also applies to governance, where instead of taking 5-year cycles to come up with a plan and institute a law, maybe we need to be a little bit more dynamic, and AI could help us with that. The second is that real-time access to updated information. We envision that AI can help significantly with governance when we now have that real-time capacity for analysis and oversight across a much larger system and set of data. Maybe now it is possible for us to see the whole system at a view rather than relying on our Excel reports and relying on small pieces, putting together small pieces to oversee the whole education system. So I think those are what we wanted to put forward in that chapter in terms of the examples that we've seen, as well as the opportunities that we're hoping for in transformation for governance. But I think there were 2 questions that we wanted to hear from the panelists. The first is, that all sounds great, but oftentimes people jump to a very fancy solution without clear foundations for governance. And I think that's often a step that excited ministers or excited leaders are hoping to to make. But I think there's a set of concrete guardrails and as well as minimum standards that every country needs to think of first, especially when they're lower resourced. So I'd love to hear from all of you what those concrete guardrails are or minimum standards that you think need to be in place before even thinking about AI for education governance. And the second is we're seeing, especially for the organizations that you should be work with, there's a lot of engagement with governments, shaping norms, kind of offering guidance, both technical as well as in resources. I'd love to hear how each of your organizations are working with these governments to ensure that these AI-driven tools don't end up centralizing power and kind of recreating the same dynamic, but shift that into strengthening and kind of empowering the students, teachers, the real actors in the education system who are oftentimes at the mercy of top-down decisions. How do these tools actually then shift that dynamic and put power and empower those who are in the classrooms out on the field? So I'll leave it at that. And Fernando, over to you to go through our sequence of questions.
Thank you so much, Calista. Let's hear from each of our panelists. And let's begin with you, Stefan, this time. And let's try to keep it to 5 minutes each.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry, I spoke too much last time. Well, first, what we would always say, is to the first, the minimum standard that you want to have are really, the data protection, privacy, security, ensuring that, you can audit and test against biases if you're making decisions, being transparent about how you use the systems, etc. And that's something that, which is still very important and that we continue to say for, OECD countries, but where largely you already have a lot of regulation in place to actually support that. What I would say as a starting point in the global source, to me, and actually that's an effort which is already ongoing, it's really to start with a good information system, as you've mentioned, where you can have real-time information and that actually can be used for, diagnosis, predictions, and etc. And so something that is very useful and important. That's really the basis to have an interesting use of AI at the system level, to have all this information about what's going on in the system. There are two examples where actually this can really help to transform it that I wanted to mention. One is actually in India and in Gujarat in particular, where they have set up this VSK, the Vidya Samishka Kendra, so that's kind of the information system, bringing together a lot of different tools. And I think that the World Bank actually was one of the funders of that. So that's really kind of a very good information system that they've put in place, and which actually allowed to reduce teacher absenteeism, so the initial philosophy wasn't great, in my opinion, because it was very much related to controlling the system, but it's also really helped them to define new types of policies, to provide feedback to teachers, with these regular assessments using actually the technology that was available on that. And so that's really one of the very interesting cases in the global source, to my knowledge, of true digital transformation, with actually the political pushback that you can have when you do something like that, but where you can actually see some positive effects in terms of, the impact. Because at the end of the day, that's really the way that you want actually to keep the use of these tools accountable is by measuring what the effects they have, and so by, doing research, impact evaluations, and also by working with the tool designers so that, they can be actually useful. So having a set of standards for the tools, for example, for GenAI, making sure that as a guardrails, that they are safe, that they are curriculum aligned, that, they are understand and designed in such a way that, some of the pedagogical aspects are being understood, that and that they're effective, obviously, so that their use leads to learning and not just to, being a gadget. But for that to work, you also have to think of the human side of it, and how, as you've mentioned, I think we often frame it as a problem of professional development, and we believe that each time we have something new, then we need people to get professional development to use it, But sometimes the introduction is also the the innovation is a professional development, if you want, because that's actually forces all the systems to adjust, to learn, to work together, to make things happen, and to work with their peers. Yes, and I think I will stop there. Just say one last word on the co-creation. We have a few very good examples, and that's really one of the things that we also promote in terms of tool working with end users, stakeholders to actually, from the beginning, usually the end users are consulted when it comes to piloting, to make sure that they can improve, but not always in the design of what should be developed. And so, we have a few labs in OECD countries who try to do that. And I think that would be really something important for all countries, actually.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Over to you, Assia.
So while I was listening to this whole conversation, has been so rich. And then when Calista started speaking, I was like, we are asking so much of education systems. And that was before this technology came along. And we know, if you just look at the outcomes, that they're struggling to deliver. And so when you talked about this bit about transformation and improvement, systematic improvement is going to lead to transformation. And so we shouldn't, I always got to the point of saying, I don't want to hear the word transformation anymore. If we just kept on tweaking a little bit to be better, we will go far. Having said that, I am an optimist. I am excited, sort of cautiously excited about technology. And so I think there's this point about the issues that you raise, they're not just for Global South. I think if they apply equally to Global North. And this way, AI has been a leveler. Generative AI has been a leveler because we're all learning. We're all sort of going, running to just keep up. And as soon as you've learned what the latest developments are, they're old. They're so passé in last week. So it's been a leveler. And this is a conversation that the Global North and the Global South should have together. What is different is the resources that are available. So the solutions have to be more creative. Secondly, I think it's really important that we don't look at point solutions, we look at the full stack of solutions. So we don't say, here's a personalized adaptive learning software, but we're not thinking about the teachers or the districts or the inspection or the textbooks or the curriculum. And also that we really need to make sure that the policymakers, the decision makers, the finance ministry, the education ministry, the ICT ministry are being educated, for want of the better word, in the potential and what is it that needs to be funded and why it needs to be funded and why it's important. And I think there needs to be a focus. You can't change everything over. And so I often like to bring things down to the common sense level. I think we need a real good articulation of what the penthouse level is. What is it that good looks like? And then maybe accept that we're at the basement level now, and how do we get to the ground floor, the first floor, etc. If you're not thinking about the penthouse, if you don't have a visual and a vision of where we want the systems to be, you're not going to get there. And I think some of my frustration in the global education sector is we keep things at the basement level. We're just going to, just do it. And so therefore, of course, you're never going to catch up. The points have been sort of covered about the accuracy of the models. We have to make sure that if we are depending, and this arrival technology, everybody's using it, that is actually accurate. And models are not that accurate on the basic maths. So some of the work that AI for Education and Fab Inc. have been doing is benchmarking these models, and 65% were able to count squares. And I'm like, that is not something I'm going to be confident about saying, oh, use this for lesson plan or personalized adaptive learning. The bias needs to be addressed, but I also think it is easier to tell a language model that, you know what, you're biased, you're a bit racist, you're a bit sexist. And then they can go back and say, actually, we're going to improve it, and now we're going to test it again. It's far harder to do that with humans. the child protection and the data protection issues, the safety issues we cannot compromise on. And I wrote this down in my notes in capital letters. While I get excited about technology, this is also a technology I'm worried about because we do not understand what the risks are. And we are seeing examples of where it's influencing students, children, and young people to behave in almost take their own life, not almost take their own lives, or influence their mood, influence their behaviors. So we need to really guard against that. I think also when you ask the second part of the question about what we're doing, we just had the WISE Summit, and it was humanity at the center of education was the theme. And so when you can have LLMs that set the question, answer the question, mark the question, do the lesson, is doing everything. So then you're doing what is the role of humans, and really go back to why education is such a noble profession, a respected profession, and what it is that we do that machines cannot do. And that's a brilliant conversation to have, right? And the pandemic sort of forced it when schools closed down, and we really looked at why schools are at the center of society. Now we have to really think about what it is that humans do that technology cannot do. And so some of the work that we're doing is really looking at things like making sure large language models are inclusive, that they're rooted in the culture, and they're pedagogically rooted, pedagogically rigorous, and they are sort of the values of the culture that's using them are being reflected. So things like the benchmarking of those models, the work of EdTech Tulna in India, test bedding with teachers. So having, understanding the teacher, hearing directly from the teachers, what are their problems, what tools might be good to be addressing those problems, and working with teachers to test them are really important. And I love the idea of teachers being the researchers, the evaluators, and the ones who are setting the agenda. Evaluating of impact is really important. I said this before, but on different groups of students, those who are perhaps at a higher level than those who are lower level, how we're having to catch up, those who are speaking different languages, gender, ethnicity, faith are really important. And looking at, one of a couple of things that I was excited about that WISE has done is a research for the use of AI in higher education in Africa that reflected on 50 got feedback from 50 higher education institutions, looked at the challenges, but also really some of the groundbreaking work universities like UM6 in Morocco is doing about setting up a center within their an office for digital transformation, and looking at curriculum and pedagogy and system-wide as well. And another one is a higher education consortium of 7 countries across the continents, looking at what the role of AI in workforce development. So the North-South coming together, learning together, contextualizing is something we need to do regularly, frequently, and just have that feedback loop happening.
Thank you so much, Asia. Cristobal, over to you.
Super. I'll be quick since I know the time is running really fast. So I cannot agree more on the idea that we have so much demand on Ministry of Education to tackle with this complex technology that we don't fully understand, but we want the Ministry of Education to excel on this, right? It's quite a challenge that we are delegating onto them. We know the promises. The promise is the ministries can really identify problems faster, and they take actions faster, and they can turn this messy data into clear signals for decision making. But the truth is sometimes we don't have the capacity for that, right? We want these beautiful national dashboards of data, and we don't have the basic local data teams that can provide the basics, right? So sometimes these hyperbolic desires are lacking solid basement as well. So Let me give you a concrete example. I mean, 12 years ago or so, the promises of learning analytics were all over the place. Data was going to be transformative for improving education. 15 years later, that is still a work in progress, and it's not a problem of the discipline, but the complexities are associated to that. So I think we have to acknowledge institutional capacities constraints, as is happening beyond education as well. It is a new landscape, so we need, my advice is, let's move from everything will be done in-house to this idea of distributed governance, in which we can learn from others within the country and beyond the country. This is something that is really, really important. We cannot go only local. The second one is the complexity of the data that we are having. I mean, we have lost so much from the discussion on privacy from the social media until now, that I believe that we have to be mindful that we are relying so much on external systems that are using the data of our students, that we have no clue where the data is, how these systems are being trained. So we need to speed up in transparency in terms of how the data is being used, who is accountable for that, how we can rectify that data. There's so much work to be done in that sense. It's super easy to say, but it's really hard to implement. And a concrete example for me is we are in a very early stage. For instance, what is the age appropriate for the use of AI? The more I look into countries, the more diversity I found. I mean, everybody's having their own flavor. When is a good idea to use the AI with the students? When is a good idea to allow the kids to use it on their own, and when it's not? I believe that we have a lot of room to fill in that regard. And let me finish with the last one, which is, if we put the accelerator on the innovation without inclusion, we will widening the problems we have so far. So technology alone is designed to benefit those who are better off, from in terms of connectivity, education, social capital, cognitive capital, networks, etc. Right? So that's the nature of this technology. So the more actions we take to ensure inclusion in that regard, for instance, bringing the voice of those who are not brought into these discussions. If you go to a rural area and you ask them the problems, I'm pretty sure that they won't say LLM is part of my problems, right? So I think in that regard, we have to think back and address where is the periphery of the AI and what are the actions that we are going to take in this regard. Despite that might not be transformative, it's going to be very, very helpful. Over to you.
Thank you, Cristobal. I see that Stefan has a burning question. So over to you, Stefan.
Yes, I just wanted to echo something that both Asia and Cristobal have said, and in terms of, well, when we studied what countries were doing in terms of digital transformation, actually one of the things that we noted is that it wasn't, in many cases, it wasn't starting from purpose, but the possibilities, and so they ended up just actually digitalizing what they were previously doing rather than actually using all these tools and the data to actually solve some of the issues that they had, So I think what Jara did, I could give you another example of France, which I won't for the sake of time, but I think that, this idea of where we want to go and what is the purpose is actually should be the starting point, and the rest should come around it.
Thank you. So we're getting to the end of our conversation. Let me invite those of you listening in. If you have any questions for our panelists, why don't you post them in the Q&A? I also would like to invite you to fill out a short survey, which I have placed on the chat, just to let us know if you're interested in being informed of other conversations such as this one. And also let us know about developments that you think are happening or questions that you have about AI. Would be very curious about those. And what I'm going to now do is invite each of our panelists to make a final comment, maybe address some of the questions as we reflect on this conversation. Take no more than 3 minutes each. I will start, first of all, thanking all of you very much for the time you have taken to be here today, for sharing with us your thinking, my own views on AI and the implications that it has for education is that these are really complex questions that will not have easy answers, that will not have quick solutions or silver bullets, that require multiple stakeholders in every country to come together and wrestle with the dilemmas which are both practical and ethical. But that is very, very important that we make an effort to mobilize the power of this technology to solve real problems in education and not imagined problems that developers have. I love the idea of a task force or some other mechanism that produces coherence, that brings the different voices to the table. I love the ideas that AI is an opportunity for us to reimagine certain aspects of the education system, whether it's the teaching profession or how we think about curriculum and personalization and so on. And I do think it's very important when we engage in these conversations that the counterfactual is not some idealized vision of the education systems, but the education systems that we have. So often I engage in conversations where it would seem that every child has access to the phenomenal tutors that Humboldt had. And that's not the reality for the majority of the world's children. That's not what we're talking about. So I think it's very important that we compare the possibilities that AI creates with the real educational opportunities that students have around the world. And so I think on that, let me turn it over to each of our guests. Let's begin with you this time, Asia.
Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't begin with me and I'll have more time to.
Well, that's fine. I can begin with.
No. Let me go. I think it's what Stephen said. Like, have a very clear purpose. Why are you using this technology? Take a problem that is very, very real to you and experiment with the technology to help you fix it. But ensure that you are looking at that problem as a full stack and as a 360 rather than a point solution. Ensure that educators are part of the problem articulation as well as the problem solution hypothesis and the implementation. Experiment with it, learn out loud. So share with global South, global North, local, regional, and keep a very, very sharp eye on impact, both the positive, but also the negative. And the negative you might not see coming. So that evaluation really needs to look at making sure that you are checking things you'd not even thought about checking. There's a lot of unknowns here. But embrace it, experiment. It's exciting times and things will change.
Thank you, Asia. Cristobal.
Beautiful closing from Asia, as always. Well, they say that the AI tend to generate a 6 finger in the hands, but I'm going to go with only 5 fingers, 5 key ideas. First one is AI is reshaping education, but that doesn't come with a script. So we are all in a learning mode. Number 2, on the curriculum, is we're going to have curriculums. They need to be a living curriculum, cannot be written on a stone, given the nature of this topic that is evolving a lot. Number 3, on the teacher professional development, this is an excellent opportunity to lighten some of the administrative workload, but that should be done with care, with criteria, and not diminishing the teacher profession. Number 4, on the governance, these technologies can help us to make visible elements that are invisible. But in order to do that, we have to have all the guardrails and the protections of the data that is being used. And number 5 and last, if these machines will help us to save time, how and where we're going to invest that extra time, I think is a key discussion to move forward. Over to you.
How about you, Stefan?
Well, 3 fingers. So one is actually just say that, if you want to reap the promises of AI, we really need to do it, with intention and purpose. And that's true for pedagogy, and so it has to be aligned and used in pedagogical purposes. And that's true at the system level for whatever reason we want to use it. Second is international cooperation. I think that, because we're in learning mode, we have to share quickly what's going on in a lot of different contexts. And so, I think that I'm pleading for not just the work of international organizations, but more generally speaking, to have a quick sharing within and across countries. And the third thing is actually a response to one of the comments, about should we rather privilege upskilling or infrastructure? Well, the way we see it is basically that infrastructure is both hardware, software, and skilled human beings, and so we have to think of it as coming all together. And my last romantic, that's not industry, that's my romantic point, is just reminding ourselves that, education is about human development, human flourishing. And so we have to continue, to develop the values and the skill that we value socially and individually. And so, yeah, it cannot just be done by a machine.
Thank you so much, Stefan. I'm going to ask each of my colleagues to just make 1 minute of closing remarks. Over to you, Calista.
No, thank you all. This has been a pleasure, and I think it's exciting to see this book come to life. Our hope with this book was to kind of slow the discussion down so that we're not going, full speed and not keeping in mind what the purpose is and anchoring that in the real needs and anchoring that in priorities. And so I hope that's my hope with this book, that it reminds us to slow down, put humans at the center. And I'm looking forward to seeing more engagement and discussion with the topics that we've put forward today. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Calista. Zainab.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been a great discussion, and I think just echoing the human values, you'll see some of our chapters begin with stories of actual people, and teachers and students in the classroom, and that's what we've been trying to do. I think this conversation has brought us closer to that, of centering, like the WISE conference theme, of humanity at the center. And I would recommend everyone also go read Stanford's Human-Centered AI Framework. It's not just about the user and the individual teacher or the student, it is about the impacts on the general society in the classroom. That's what human-centered AI really means. So thank you for being here with us and advancing that conversation forward. I'll pass it on.
Thank you. I will, like Calista and Sanab, thank you for being here. I would just say that we really enjoyed writing this book because we got to explore so many use cases. And even right now, we've been receiving new use cases about founders in the Global South. And it helped us see that there's so much going on that we didn't have enough time to put them all together. But thank you.
Well, in closing, I'll just say this. We're very grateful for your interest. Our goal in writing this book is to animate a conversation and to raise as many questions as we provide answers. Each of these chapters concludes with takeaways for policy and practice, but also raising questions for policy, for practice, ethical questions, questions that deserve research. I was sharing with our panelists before we launched in that this book was published a full month ahead of schedule. We're delighted. It's an indication, we take it, of the awareness of the publisher of how much need there is for this kind of conversation. In the 5 days since the book has been published, it has been downloaded 11,000 times. We are delighted for the possibilities that open access provides, and we are in conversations about having translations of this book in 5 major languages at the moment. So within the next few months, there will be editions of this book in various languages. And so just to conclude, we're going to have a few more webinars here. Tomorrow, actually, we're going to have a conversation at 9 a.m. with 3 senior government leaders, and then at 10:30 with 3 people working in the development space in a foundation as well as in 2 companies. And so I think that's the last slide, is right, that we have. We don't have the webinars for January here. Anyway, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you very much to our panelists for your generosity and for your responsiveness. It's been a real delight to be with all of you this morning. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.